We were listening to a podcast, one of our favorites. It's a kids podcast called Brains On, about science and different random things, and they do a lot of fun stuff. And this one was on aliens, and does life exist on other planets? And so they were going through all the stuff. And midway through, Chaim stopped the conversation. He said, he's 6. He said, Mommy, do you think there are actually aliens? And she said, I don't know, bud. And he said, I know. We could ask God. And she says, yeah, we could. And he says, without missing a beat, he continues, Siri, do aliens exist?
How can I explain the mysteries of the universe to a feeble mind such as yours?
Siri wasn't quite interested in answering the question. And I think there's something to this, okay? So here's what's going on. First of all, Chaim has this deep need to know the answer. And he knows that Siri has answers. I mean, he didn't even slow down. Siri. We've been teaching him to call one of us from our phones, because you can just touch the button and call mom or dad. Anyway, but here's the deal, is that we have this deep desire to answer questions. And that one is one of those things that is so mysterious and beyond. And so we like to think about it, and we like to figure out, well, what is going on, and is it real or not? And even Siri can tell us, listen, bud, you just have to let some things be mystery, at least for the time being. And that's what this series is really about. It's about allowing us the space to ask questions instead of providing answers. And we see it throughout our text. We see it throughout Christian history. We are constantly asking questions and revising things, making changes, making edits, rethinking how we do things. We've had multiple historical moments where we've made huge swings in tradition, trying to better ourselves and our faith and our understanding about God. And so these questions like, do aliens exist, actually still make us think, even if we're an adult, even if we're 6 years old. And it's not always as simple as just asking Siri. That's not Siri's real answer, by the way, just for kicks. She has a real answer. It's actually like, here's the likeliness of life in the Milky Way. Anyway. But we need to be asking questions to help our faith and to be in the right place, in the right state of mind. One of my favorite stories is actually from our Hebrew text is actually Jonah. What I love about Jonah is God closes the book or the story, the narrative, with a question. He says, so here's a quick rundown. So Jonah is called by God. Jonah says no. Jonah is thrown from a boat and then says, okay, maybe I'll go, God. And so Jonah then goes and he tells these people what's supposed to go on. And he knows in his heart that these are not good people, that they should, this is what he thinks, they should die for their behavior and for who they are. And so he goes up on a hill and he sits and he waits. And I kid you not, he waits for God to destroy this city. Have you done that before? They're going to get it. God's coming. I know it. And you're just waiting for that moment. I'm waiting for that moment to happen in our political world down south with Trump. I'm just waiting for that to happen. But he goes up on this hill and he sits and he just waits to watch God destroy this city. And it doesn't happen. In fact, God says to Jonah, he says, you, in the end of the day, he's complaining about this sort of bush thing. And he says, you are complaining about a bush. Here is a city with thousands of people and animals, men, women, children. Should I not also be concerned about these people? And it's just left there. Answer this for me, Jonah. Should I not also be concerned about these people? It really gives a lot of power when we close one of these big questions about what's going to happen, when we close that with another question. And we're left thinking and discovering and searching and seeking and asking more questions. And one thing about faith that doesn't ever get old is that we don't ever figure it out. And so we are constantly, we can go back, we can read our Bible once a year for every year and get something new. We could read, this is a Christian tradition, we could spend days meditating on a single verse or a single line or a single word and get newness out of that every day because our context changes, our life changes, our brain works in new ways, God speaks in different ways. And so we learn from our questions every time they're asked. Jesus had a way with asking questions and leaving things open for you to think for yourself. Here's what I think he's trying to do. I think he's trying to get you, well, whoever he's speaking to, he's trying to get you to think on the purpose. And so what I love about Jesus' words, from beginning to end, he is constantly revising the understanding of the day. And we continue this process. We continue this process of revising our current understanding to say, now wait a second, is that really the purpose? And so we're going to look this morning at Matthew chapter 12, at one of these moments where he is calling these people out to think, to discover, to question. And so here's the setting. First of all, Jesus is a Jew. I don't know if I'm the one to break that to you or not, but Jesus is a Jew, and he comes with huge amounts of Jewish tradition that shape how he thinks about the world, how he thinks about faith, how he thinks about the scriptures, which is the law. And it also sets his location. So when he speaks to anyone, they have an understanding that they're coming from. So almost always they have their own Jewish understanding about the world and about what they're supposed to do in the law. And so here's where this begins. There are hundreds of laws that they are supposed to obey. This is how they get right with God. Sometimes we boil that down to 10 and say, well, I've done my 10 commandments. Or we say, I'm a good person. We do this still. This is not just a Jewish problem. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. When the Pharisees saw it, these are religious leaders, one section of religious leaders, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. And he said to them, here's his questions. Have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God and he ate. He ate what was consecrated, actually, for the priests. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and yet are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would have commended the guiltless. You would have not condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So he says, here's the tradition that you've been told, and here are the things you're focused on. But the question at hand is, what's the point? What is the purpose of living out this law? Why are you respecting the Sabbath? And he asks them a question. Have you not heard about this? And he follows that or the story follows. Matthew tells the next story. He left that place and entered their synagogue. A man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him, "Is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath?" They're looking for answers. They're actually looking to sort of trap him here. And he said to them, "Suppose one of you has only one sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath. Will you not lay hold of it and rescue it?" Simple question. Do you save the sheep? Are you worried about the sheep? Or are you worried about people? It's the same question that God put to Jonah. You're worried about this bush? Should I not be concerned about the people? You're worried about this sheep, which you would go in and rescue on the Sabbath. And I'm worried about people. The question is, what is the purpose? Are you rejecting the purpose or the heart or the point of the law in exchange to follow it so that you feel good about what you're doing? He said, so it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. So he asked the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and it was restored, as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him to destroy him. Simple question. Is it okay to do this? They're looking for a yes or a no. And he says, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you something that should dig into why you're saying what you're saying and why you're asking what you're asking. But instead, you're focused on this surface level stuff and not getting to the heart of what your faith is supposed to be about. I remember I was in university. I went to school basically on a beach. So I spent a lot of time on the beach. And I remember this moment when sort of things began to shift. I actually don't know why I was there. I don't know who else was there. Like, this thing so overwhelmed me that I have no idea what the context is here. I just know I was on the beach and I was thinking, and the thought entered my mind. What is the point? What is the purpose of my faith? You see, I had grown up in a conservative environment that told me, here's the point, here are the answers, here's what you need to know. And in that moment, just for a brief moment, letting my guard down and being able to ask the question, are those answers getting to the real question? And it shifted my thought process. It shifted my faith. It changed how I looked at God. It changed how I looked at the Bible. Because in that moment, I realized that my entire faith had been built around my selfish desire to save myself and get my reward. That was the point. That was my purpose, was that reward. And it was selfish. It was just about me. Not a lot's changed. Yesterday, Jenna said something, and I said, "No, I was sorry. I was just thinking about myself. I didn't catch any of that." She said, "Yeah, I know, Bradley." But the reality is that moment shifted how I thought about the world. And this is, and God. And this is what Jesus is trying to get us to do every time He opens His mouth, is think about the purpose. So here's the law that's laid out. Well, why are you following that law? Here's what we've been told. Here's what you've heard. Here's what you've read. But why? Why is that happening? Why are you following that? Is there a point in living that out in the real world? And so in this moment, when there's a man crippled here, and he is willing to ask the question, should I not be concerned about this person if you would be concerned about a sheep? And he leaves it right there. Sort of. He then heals him and said, it's fine, get over it. But the whole direction of Jesus, every time we look down, we look at him making a minor tweak in what they've been called to do. You've heard that it was said that you shouldn't murder. But I'm telling you, think about the anger ahead of that. You shouldn't even be angry. That shouldn't be entering your mind. You've heard that it was said, and he makes these minor adjustments to get you to think about the depth and process of your faith to go into the deeper purpose and point of things. Let's go one step further. Matthew chapter 15. So this morning we're looking at these sort of conflict moments. But he's also going to do these questions. He's going to do this for everyone. So these are conflicts with Pharisees or Sadducees, religious leaders. That moment after church when you come up to me and say, hey, Bradley, did you think about this? Because that didn't make sense. These are those moments with the person that was leading in the synagogue, and he says, wait a second. Then the Pharisees, chapter 15. Then Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands before they eat. There's a good and healthy reason for washing your hands before you eat. But he answered them, and why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? Why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? He goes into this moment about honoring your mother and father. We're going to skip that. And he finishes this. So for the sake of your tradition, you make void the word of God. Isaiah prophesied rightly, and he said, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. He says, look, you've turned these laws and these doctrines and these things into the point, into the purpose. But the real purpose is deeper than that. The real purpose is figuring out how you love someone in the midst of this world of suffering. The real purpose is figuring out how you love God in a way that spreads that through your community like a wildfire. In that moment when I asked that question, standing on the beach with who knows what going on around me, the world shifted because I stopped thinking about my faith as a reward moment that I'm trying to achieve. Faith isn't an achievement. Faith is a journey. It is a process. It is a life spent asking questions to deepen our faith and share God with those around us in those ways. And sometimes in our need to answer those questions, we just call out and say, Siri, what do I need to do to be right with God? Siri, what is all this about? And Siri says, I can't explain the mysteries of the world to such a feeble mind. And so we ask more questions. Because at the end of the day, the mysteriousness is what is so exciting and invigorating about discovering and learning and knowing God. And carrying that into our world is what is exciting about what is the purpose. If you can answer the question, life gets really boring. I promise it gets really boring. So ask another question and dig deeper and find out more and learn more about your own faith and your own purpose and your own God.